The November 6, 2012 meeting of the Santa Barbara City Council Finance Committee will now come to order. Are there any members of the public wishing to speak on items not on today's agenda? Seeing none, I will close public comment and move to the first item on our agenda. Mr. Samario.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Bob Samario, Finance Director. So we're going to be talking to you about a project to replace our financial management system. This is a project which actually started a little while ago. We are going to make a report to the City Council. It's going to be a little shorter version of what we're presenting to you. We want to just take our time and get into some of the details of why we're doing the project and the timing of all that. It's a fairly expensive thing to replace. It's in the millions of dollars for us to fully implement and replace the system. So it's not inconsequential in terms of dollar amounts, but we think it's really important and necessary for us to do that. So we wanted to kind of go through that and justify the expense and the need. So our outline is just some introductory comments, and then we want to talk about the selection process, how we ended up with Tyler's product. It's called Munis, and in fact, the vice president of Tyler is here, Mr. Bill Lane. So if you had any questions about that end of it, he's here to answer those. We wanted to talk about why we ended up with Tyler's Munis system, its features and all that. And then do a little bit of comparison between what we have today, the FMS and the Munis system in terms of functionality. We also want to, of course, talk about how much it's going to cost to replace it, and then the timeline for implementation, and then just generally the impacts to the city, because it's going to have a citywide impact. So I'm going to really start basic, because I think sometimes when you hear FMS, people, it's a little bit abstract, because it's like, what is that? And I wanted just to first give you a definition. It's a set of computerized programs that make up the accounting and financial reporting infrastructure of an organization. And I think it's important to stress that, at least from my perspective, because I'm in the finance department, the FMS is the backbone of the city operations. We really couldn't do the things we do without it, whether it be pay checks, pay our bills, collect the money we collect. So it's really important, and it's not just for us, but it's any organization. Even if it's a small organization, you might use Quicken for their finances or QuickBooks. Large businesses, of course, use other different systems. We are considered a fairly large organization. Our budget is $250 million, as you know, and which means that we take in that much money every year in revenues. We also spend that much money every year, and we have not just like in the private sector where they have a single operation. We have really a lot of different operations we have to account for separately. We have 80 different funds in the city, which is a lot, and it's 13 departments span those 80 funds. We have over 1,000 unique line items, so everything that we track, whether it be revenues or expenses, we track at the line item level, and there are over 1,000 of those. We also maintain projects, or do a lot of projects, typically capital projects, and we currently have over 2,000 capital project accounts that we are tracking. So it's a lot of information we're having to track, and of course 1,500 employees, including part-time and hourly. So the purpose of any financial management system, particularly for the city, is it allows us, as I said, to really account for all these activities, and it's really important that we track the money. We got to account for it in so many different ways. It allows us to process the payments. That's our accounts payable function, as you'll see, for all the services and goods that we buy, and of course paying all of our employees through our payroll system. We use the FMS to compile our budget. It's a budget document that we use currently the FMS for. It allows departments to remotely enter their financial information, and then we kind of massage it, and then from there create the budget document. All the purchases of goods and services go through a requisition process. That's part of the purchasing module. And then we also do bill for services. In addition to the utility billing system, which we replaced several years ago, we bill for other things on behalf of other departments, primarily slips for the waterfront, airport leases for the airport department, and so forth. And then one of the things you're going to hear that's important here is that it does allow us to generate management reports, because accounting for stuff is one part of it, but access to the information and being able to report on the information is really the key. And one of the limitations that you'll hear is that the current system has a lot of limitations in that regard in terms of being able to access data easily, information, particularly when we talk about department users, not just in people in finance. And then it allows us not only for just management reports to meet federal, state, and local reporting requirements. We use it, of course, to prepare our CAFR, the year-end financial report, our interim statements. We have a lot of federal and state grants we get that require us to submit reports, financial reports on how we're doing, how we're spending the money, and we use that for this purpose. So why are we replacing it? It's a very old and outdated system. 22 years ago is when it was first implemented. Rob Badger, when he first started with the city, along with Bob Pearson, my predecessor, they were the key persons involved in implementing this in-house system. Now, if you think about the changes in technology over the last 22 years, let alone the last 5 years, 22 years is a long time. As Rob and I were kidding, it's sort of like going back to the Stone Age, with chisel and stone. It's really an old system. The things have really progressed so much along in the last 22 years, even the last, as I said, 5 or 10 years. And so we're really behind in terms of the kind of tools and technologies that are available today. The system that our financial management system is on, the actual program, which is called admins, and the operating system behind that, also very old. Concerns about whether there people who are and companies are going to be around to support those systems. We have 3 people in the city who know how to write programs and admins, but if you look at statewide or nationally, not very many, because it's becoming an obsolete program. And as I kind of mentioned, it has limited functionality. It does do the basics pretty well. We were able to sort of patch together what's called CRIS, or a reporting system on top of it, a front end, that has helped us in terms of accessing the data. So it kind of does its job, but just minimally. It doesn't have a Windows interface, so and we'll show you that. So it's not like what you're used to with all the Windows environment. It's very cumbersome to work with. And as I kind of alluded to, it doesn't have as you will see with the new system, easy to use reporting tools. Again, to me, the key is accessing data easily, quickly, by not just finance staff, but department users who have to make these important decisions. So that's really what we see, what we don't have today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rob Badger, our Information Systems Supervisor. He's really the project manager for this replacement project, and he's leading the way, obviously supported by other staff. But he's going to talk about the rest of the remaining parts of this report.
Okay, thank you. Now, the selection process we went through is a typical RFP process. Step 1 is to complete a needs assessment and then issue an RFP. But the first task was to form a project team. We wanted to make sure that we included city staff. Other cities have gone through this process and didn't include department staff and ended up with a failure. So what we did is Bob, myself, our former accounting manager, Ruby Carrillo, and representatives from every department, and the supervisors, managers, and senior staff who run the FMS modules in human resources and in finance were all involved in this project. And we also hired a consultant, Jerry Wacker, to assist us with this. He's done similar projects with other cities, and he's familiar with the vendors that are out there today. So the next step was to do a detailed needs assessment of what we needed for a financial management system. We spent quite a few weeks on that, came up with hundreds of requirements, and created a needs matrix. We then developed a RFP and sent that and the needs matrix out to 10 qualified vendors. We gave them about 2 months to reply, and we received 4 responses back. We received 2 from Tyler. They have multiple financial systems they're selling. We've got one from Eden Software and also Munis Software. And we received a proposal from SunGard and also New World's Systems. Those were the 4 that came back. And I think we only received 4 back because we did such a good job of putting into the RFP our specifics of what we needed. So vendors knew that if they couldn't meet the requirements, they didn't respond. So we got 4 good responses. We then evaluated the proposals and conducted some reference checks. And based on that, we narrowed the list down to 2 vendors, Tyler and their Munis software, and also SunGard One Solution. Next step was to actually conduct some detailed 3-day-long on-site software demonstrations and vendor company presentations. So again, the project team sat through that, plus additional city staff attended those as well. At the end of that, the project team met and preliminarily selected Munis. They felt that that was the product that best met our needs. But we wanted to do some further checking to make sure that it was going to be the product that could meet all our needs. So we conducted additional reference checks. A total of 8 reference checks were done. Additional software demonstrations. The vendor came on site, conducted one-on-one demonstrations with their staff and our finance and human resources staff. So we had the opportunity to ask questions, look at the software in greater detail. And we also did 2 site visits, one to Redondo Beach, and we actually did one virtually over the internet to St. Louis County, Missouri, which was interesting. But that gave us the opportunity to talk to the users, not hearing sales information, but actually talking to people that use the software. And we got positive feedback in all of that. And based on that significant effort then, the project team selected Tyler Munis as the product to move forward with. And so our next step was to pick which modules that we needed and which implementation services we needed, data conversion, training, et cetera. So we did that, came up with a total package, and then went through a negotiation process with the vendor to come up with a good and final price. And I think we got a good price. Tyler gave us a 20% discount on their software, which is about a $130,000 discount. Plus, they also waived the first year of their maintenance and support contract, which is about $120,000. I'll show more of that in the next slides.
Before you go on, could I ask just a question about the site visits?
Yeah.
Did you get any negative or critical remarks? Did people talk about any problems or limitations?
There's always negative. Some of the negative comments I think we heard at Redondo Beach were having to do with the fact that they didn't fully implement the software. What Redondo Beach had done is they had an old system like ours, and when they implemented, they just kept doing the same business processes they were doing with new software and really didn't take advantage of it, so they weren't seeing the advantages in the software.
So they were negative about themselves, sounds like what you're saying.
Yes, yeah, not really about Tyler or Munis. What I found in all of the reference checks, I always ask about how good is their tech support, and that was one of the questions we asked in every case. And everybody gave high marks to Tyler for their technical support, which is a very key thing. When you're having issues and problems, it's important to get support when you need it.
Implementation process and services. Under the implementation process, we checked on the whole implementation process.
What do you mean? You want to talk about?
Yeah, I also wanted to point out that one of the key things that we asked about is they can have a great product and even potentially a great support at the back end once it's implemented and running. But what's critical for us, and we had a little bit of issue with this, or actually a fair amount of issue when we wound up with utility billing, our Infinity system. The implementation process was really, really poor because they did a poor job in managing it. There was turnover of staff. They just didn't manage it well, and we did our end. But it's both sides have to do a good job of staying on track. And so we ran into a lot of problems. So one of the things we wanted to make sure was checking to see how well did they do with implementation. Were they timely? Did they manage it? Were they really engaged and involved? Or do they, once they sell it, done, and we'll see, hopefully it gets implemented. So that was an important part, and we got good responses in that regard.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, one other instance I remember now, I don't remember the bad so much as all the good, but there was an instance where one of the cities had an issue with working with the project manager. There were some personality conflicts, and so they requested that Tyler replace that with another project manager, and Tyler complied. So there was an issue with staff, but it was rectified.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, why Tyler's Munis system? Why should we buy Tyler's? Well, first of all, it addresses all of the deficiencies and concerns we had that Bob just expressed with our current FMS. One of the biggest concerns is the number of staff to support it. There's really 3 people that can support our current FMS, myself and 2 of my staff. Tyler is a well-established and experienced vendor, even with California cities. They're currently installed in 20 California cities. They have 1,400 customers nationwide. They've been marketing the Munis software for over 30 years. And Tyler itself has $300+ million in revenues last year. So they're a well-established company. I think they're a good one to go with. The Munis software provides the functionality of our FMS and much more, and I'll show you that in some slides coming up. It uses the Windows interface, which everybody is familiar with. Believe it or not, the interface I'm going to show you for the current FMS, it was state-of-the-art at one time, many years ago, way beyond what other cities were using at the time, but when Windows 95 came out, that went to the side. This new Munis system also delivers personalized information to the user. I'll show you how that works with a slide. It provides powerful and easy-to-use reporting tools. There's an ad hoc reporting tool that non-technical people can use to write their own reports. Plus, the Munis information data is accessible to users of Word and Excel. Many, many people know how to use those tools, and the data can be used so that you can write your own reports or do your own analysis in Excel. So there's great power there putting in the hands of the users without having them come to information systems all the time. Munis also provides electronic workflow for entry and approval of requisitions and vendor invoices, budgeting, time card entry. That's a big plus. And it has a, I'm sorry.
Mr. White.
I'm sorry.
I don't understand that last one. Could you explain that?
Okay.
please?
Electronic workflow. Everything is stored electronically when the user puts in, let's say, a requisition or a vendor invoice. A vendor invoice comes in. They will enter the vendor invoice into the financial system so that a check can be cut to pay the vendor. So step one is to enter it into the system. Well, they need approvals, and there could be possibly multiple levels of approval. I could have one of my staff enter it, but I have to approve it before it goes over to accounts payable to be approved. But you could even have additional steps. My boss could also have approval. So what this system does is the person puts in the invoice, and then the next step, it automatically goes to the next person in this electronic workflow process. They get notified, and I'll show you a screen that makes it easy for people to monitor that, plus they get an email. And when they approve it, then it goes on to the next person. But they could not approve it and send it back to the person who entered the invoice to begin with. So it's all handled online. No more shuffling papers around where you enter it. Our current system, you enter it in, you print it out, and then you hand it to your boss for them to approve, and so on. So it's a lot more automated. Okay? Content management. That's where Munis reports are stored electronically. You no longer have to print them out. If you want to access them, you can. You can get to them. You can print them out if you want, or you can email them if you want to do that. Plus any associated financial documents, vendor invoices that come in. We can scan them and store them in the system so they can be available to anybody, even in this workflow process. No longer do we have to attach an invoice to a claim and then forward that to finance. It could all be entered into the system electronically and available to anybody to review. So this eliminates the need to have file cabinets to store all this. So that's another plus. Now I'll show you a contrast between the two systems here, what the old and the new kind of look like. First of all, these are all the modules that we're purchasing from Tyler. And so this includes all of the modules that we currently have in our FMS and all of the new ones which are indicated with an asterisk. So such as bid management, fixed assets, project accounting, vendor self-service, employee self-service, etc. are all new. So there's the additional functionality we're getting with the new Tyler Munis system. There's quite a few modules there. Okay. Okay, here's an FMS menu. This is what the old text green screen looks like. It has a little bit of color, but it's pretty much just text-based. You can only really do two things on here. You can choose a selection. It either runs a menu or a report or brings up a data entry screen, or you can log out. That's pretty much all you can do on this screen. So it's not Windows. It's difficult to find your data entry screens and reports because a menu calls a menu can call a menu. We only can have 15 at one time. It's not very versatile. Minimal functionality, as I mentioned. All you can do is make a selection or log out. And users can't customize this. This is what they get from us. Here is a typical data screen. It's pretty much 80 characters across, 24 rows down. You can't change the font. That's as much information as you can fit there. I've had people over the years ask me for, can I have the claim date or the warrant date or the PO date? Man, sorry, we have to have another screen. So we end up having multiple screens that you have to link to see the information. That's pretty much it. Okay, Munis dashboard. This is more windows, and it is a lot more information. It's a little hard to see, so I apologize for that. It'll be better on your computer screen. But what it shows you is all of the abilities of being able to navigate with the Windows interface, with the mouse. You can point and click. It's easier to find screens and reports because what they have in here is my favorites. So all the reports or any of the programs that you run on a normal basis, daily basis, you can put in there as a user, the ones that you run. Over here, the reports that you run. You can customize this. You don't have to come to IS to do that. Also in here is an interface to workflow. If you're in the approval process for entering requisitions and approving them, then you'll get a notification in here. You'll get an email, but you also can come in here, click on that, and go to the screen to do the approval. So it's very easy to get to. You don't have to drill down through a menu to get there. Plus, over here, you have the ability of adding additional functionality. And in this case, this user put in access to their email. So you can see your email right in here. You don't have to go to Outlook. So a lot more functionality. Here's an example of a user that actually embedded a report in their dashboard. This was very important to them, apparently. They wanted some information, and they also wanted to see a graph. So if you have that kind of information, you know, whatever it would be in the city, financial information, you can embed that in your dashboard. And I know, I apologize again how small this is, but what it illustrates is here's one screen that shows a lot of vendor information. The FMS screen just showed a little bit of information. This shows a lot of vendor information plus tabs. As you know, in Windows, you click a tab, you get more information. You don't have to go to other screens or run other reports. And down here it shows all the checks for that vendor, all the invoices, all the purchase orders, all the contracts, with scrolling, all right there. One screen. Costs. Well, a couple of years ago, we were able to get a $3 million capital improvement program approved, and that's where the funds are coming for this project. We estimated about $1.6 million for the software, the hardware, and the implementation services. We put in about a 20% contingency, $320,000, and also estimated about $1 million for staff backfill. And that staff backfill is very important because of the heavy workload that HR staff, finance staff, and information system staff will see as we go through implementation. People have to get their normal work done. In addition to that, go through all of the work of learning this new program. So we put money in there to hire temporary staff to fill in those tasks, to free up our staff so they can dedicate that time to working on the implementation so that they learn the new software and aren't stressed out as much as they're going to be anyway. Tyler's cost, we've come in at $1.64 million. That's about $1.4 million for the software, hardware, and services, and we put in $250,000 for contingency. That includes a 10% contingency we typically do in technology projects, plus funds for purchasing a business license application from Tyler if we find that that will meet our needs. That's just in case. We'll do that analysis a little bit further down the line, but that's what the extra money is for. Other costs then, the servers that all this software will run on, $40,000 about. And then staff backfill right now, we anticipate that it's going to cost less than what we estimated because the implementation timeline is less. We estimated about a 3-year implementation based on prior information, and it looks like it's going to be less than 2 years. So we're anticipating some savings there.
Just wanted to point out the $3 million was split between the general fund and enterprise funds. The general fund portion was about 40%, and all enterprise funds collectively the remaining 60%.
Okay. One question about the implementation phase.
Yeah.
Even 2 years sounds like a long, long time to me. What goes on? Are you going to talk in more detail about that?
I can talk about that. Let me get to the slide where we talk about
Sure.
implementation,
Great.
the timeline, and I can go through exactly what the different steps are. Absolutely. Here's some other costs, the ongoing costs. The prior slide showed the project costs. Of course, first year was waived. That was part of our agreement with Tyler, saving about $120,000. Year 2 and 3, they will not increase more than 3%. It's an up to 3%. Year 4 and 5, up to 5%. So it'll be held at that amount, no more than that. Okay, implementation timeline, about a year and a half. It's divided into 2 phases. The core financials, that's all those modules you saw on that prior slide except for the human resources and payroll modules. That'll take about 13 months, and it's scheduled to begin in December. We'll go live in January of 2014. And then human resources and payroll modules will begin in October. About 3 months before we go live with the financials, we'll begin that phase, and it's scheduled to go live July 2014. Now, as far as what happens in implementation, the first thing we need to do in December is sit down and come up with a detailed implementation plan, taking into consideration Tyler's staff, what their availability is, and our staff's availability. Then we sit down with them and go through and decide how to configure the software. These new software applications have many different settings because they're used by many different companies or different cities. And so we need to decide how we will use the software, then configure it. Then we have to go through a data conversion. We'll take the information out of our current system, convert it, bring it into the Munis system, and begin training on how to use that. The finance and HR staff will be trained first, make sure everything's working, do some testing. We'll involve some of the department users, make sure that they're included in that process so they can provide feedback on how they use the software. Go through a testing process, actually run it somewhat in parallel, enter the same information in both systems to make sure we're getting the same results. That's very, very important for payroll. And we'll actually do some live parallel testing for a couple of payroll periods to make sure bottom line is that we're calculating all of the salary, the pay, the benefits, all of that is exactly the same amount, the PERS amounts, all of that. You need to make sure they're exactly the same before we go live. Absolutely not going live until all of that works. And I know if you've read the newspapers over the last few years, you've seen where other cities, LA School District, I think was one, that was actually live with their payroll system, and it was not putting out the checks in the correct amount, and they were in a big mess. Well, we won't do that. We're going to make sure that everything is accurate before we go live, or we continue the testing process.
So you're going to run the systems in parallel for some amount of time?
Yes, the human resources and payroll, and you know, maybe Bill can speak more to that. My understanding is that for that we absolutely have to be in parallel. You have to enter the same information in both systems for a period of time and making sure everything is the same. In the core financials, you don't do 100% parallel, but you do enter information in both systems and do comparisons. But if you want to speak to more of that, sure. Bill.
Need to be on the mic.
We need to push it on. There you go.
Okay. With regard to our implementation process, it's, as Rob was mentioning, it is very common in a payroll process when you're cutting payroll checks, mission critical, you want to make sure you tie our application to the penny to the checks that we're going to be cutting. And there's a parallel process. So every implementation process has its course of developing a project plan, controlling expectations, going through the process of implementing the system, and a financial implementation can take this a reasonable amount of time to do this. You could do it quicker, but then the amount of time that you need to dedicate to that project, even though you have a job to do, just gets elevated. So what we end up with is some conflicts of interest, where some people, some of our customers will tell us, we'd like to go quicker, but our finance director needs to be involved with all these meetings, and so instead of spending 25% of your time in the implementation, you're spending 75% of your time, and then the implementation gets a negative connotation. You have a tougher time managing the change process. You have more budget going towards backfill positions, and you know, we've done it that way. A lot of times when we ended up in those situations was in 1999 when everyone thought the world was going to end with .com. In year 2000, so we ended up in a lot of situations we had to compress the implementation time frame. But as Rob stated, in the financial implementation, you're not really running a parallel. You're just validating the data. A lot of times you have a hard time mirroring what's in your financial system because you're making changes to your chart of accounts and the way you account for things. There's a lot more functionality in our system with reporting for Bob and his staff. And you can take advantage of some of those things. So it's hard to have a parallel between financial systems that could look a little bit different because there'll be a lot more detail, a lot more analysis, a lot more analytics that are available to you now than what was available to you before. And then on the payroll side, as we mentioned, it's very customary that we are not going to do anything until those paychecks are perfect. and that it requires a parallel process.
And is the underlying data in a database, a standard database of some kind?
It's in a Microsoft SQL Server database, yes.
Great.
And we use the most current version, which is SQL Server, if anyone's technology buffs, 2008 R2, which is the most current version of SQL Server that's available.
Okay.
And it'll be validated on SQL Server 2012 in the second quarter of next year, once it's released. It hasn't been released yet.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Last slide here, impact on the city. Implementing a new FMS may be the largest, most complex technology effort the city will ever undertake. I believe that. It's a large investment, could be up to $3 million. It's a long-term commitment, 2.5 years we're estimating right now. We've already spent 1 year in the selection process. We're looking at another 1.5 years to do implementation. This will affect every city employee. It really affects the people who use the FMS the most. Finance and HR users will be affected the most. Department users that enter recs and claims, et cetera, will be affected. But every city employee, and we need to decide how we're going to do this, but we do have the electronic time card, online time card entry. Not sure we'll be able to get to every employee doing it online. There's some challenges there about computer access, but that is a potential. Plus, there's the employee self-service. So employees, even from their home computers, can get in and look at their compensation information. New business processes are introduced. Our current FMS was highly customized for the city of Santa Barbara. This software is used best business processes designed for many, many customers. So obviously, there's going to be many new business processes we have to learn. So that's going to be a challenge. Many new data entry screens and reports to learn. So staff needs the time to learn and adapt to this new Munis software. And with that, I'm finished with the presentation. If you have questions.
Okay, very good. Questions from committee members? Ms. Murillo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you explain the backfill process again for me? I'm not sure I got what you said.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Employee backfill is where we can hire temporary staff. That's temporary employees. They could be retirees that could, familiar with the way we conduct our business. We can have them come in, and they would do those duties that would free up our staff to work on the Munis software project. It could be a clerical job. It could be, in one instance, it could be where they're entering requisitions or claims, more of a clerical type task. For someone in finance, freeing up that person who would do that to do a little more advanced duties. And Bob, if you want to speak to that too, that's kind of the concept.
I think like a good example, you think of John Martin, he was our payroll supervisor. He's going to be really impacted because he supervises payroll and accounts payable. And, 50% of his time is going to be needed to work on this for probably 6 to 9 months. So what the strategy is to have existing staff under him, like Michelle Sanchez and Doreen and Larry, sort of take on some of his duties, but then bring in a backfill to temporary staff to take on some of the lower level duties that they were doing. So everybody sort of moves up, and we bring in backfill for the lower level tasks. So that's the strategy, generally speaking, as we move from module to module over the 1.5 year period.
So my second question then, I was concerned about maybe we would lose some employees or a loss of jobs related to this new system. Is that an issue at all?
If anything, I think there's going to be more work because there's more information that could be entered in this system. That remains to be seen. There'll be efficiencies, absolutely, like the workflow process would probably help make things more efficient. But with the ability of putting more information in and being able to extract more information, it might take more time, but that remains to be seen. I think productivity may go up, but it may take more work to get the information in.
Thank you. And then my final question is about the police department using it, and can it be applied to our parking citations monitoring?
Well, that's an interesting question. The FMS is used by all departments in the city. The police department also uses our current FMS. And it's interesting you say that because Tyler Munis also has a parking citation module. And a few weeks ago, the police department came down and we actually saw a demonstration of it. But it's in the early stages for them to decide what product to replace it. We're not certain that the Tyler Munis product will meet their needs. They need to come up with the requirements, just like we did with this project, and then take a look at Tyler Munis based on that. Will it meet all of their needs? If it does, it'd be a great way for them to go because it's interfaced with all the rest of the financials. The cash receipting system, general ledger, et cetera, is already there. We don't have to create any kind of an external interface to a different system. So there's a lot of pluses there, but it still basically needs to meet their needs first.
Thank you for your presentation, and nice to meet you, Mr. Badger.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. White?
Thank you. I've heard Sheriff Francisco refer to our computer system as a creaky computer system. So how does this, I mean, we're sort of getting whiz-bang software. How does that match up to our infrastructure of computers? Is it?
Well, I'm not quite certain. Are you asking about the actual computer hardware
Yes.
that it runs on?
Just our infrastructure, so to speak.
Yeah. It should be fine. We are going to buy 2 new servers to run all of this software on. The servers that we're currently running the FMS are not that old. They're about 3 years old now. We needed to replace those because the prior server that the FMS was running on, I think, was like 15 years old, and we had concerns that it was just going to fail on us. So we did, about 3 years ago, buy a more modern server that still runs this old-fashioned software. And we estimate it'll last until we get through this conversion, about 5 or 6 years at least. But we are buying the more modern, up-to-date server hardware to run the Munis software. It'll be the latest. Plus, the fact that, and you talk about infrastructure beyond the servers, since this software is accessible through the Internet Explorer browser, it can be run with very little overhead throughout the whole network. Very easily done. So the infrastructure should support it without any trouble at all.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Do we need to do any action? This was just a report, right?
Yeah, just a report.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned.